February 19th, 1945. The black sands of Iwo Jima shimmered under the morning sun as U.S. Marines stepped off their landing craft and into the fire of Japanese guns. The island, just 8 square miles of volcanic rock, was about to become one of the bloodiest battlefields of the Pacific War. For the men storming its beaches, there was no sound more haunting than the shriek of bullets slicing through the air, and no smell more unforgettable than that of burning sulfur and cordite. But hidden beneath that unforgiving terrain, deep inside a network of fortified tunnels, Japanese commanders laughed. They believed no weapon on Earth could reach them. Their bunkers were cut from volcanic rock, reinforced with steel and concrete. To them, the idea that the Americans' toy flamethrowers could breach such fortifications was a joke, one that would soon turn to ash. For months before the invasion, U.S. intelligence had been studying Iwo Jima. The island was part of Japan's inner defense ring, the final barrier before the home islands. It was small, but its strategic value was immense. The airfields on Iwo Jima gave the Japanese a forward base from which they could intercept American bombers heading for Tokyo. General Tadamaki Kurabayashi, commander of the island's defense, had turned Iwo Jima into an underground fortress. Unlike earlier island battles, where Japanese troops fought to the death in open charges, Kurabayashi forbade banzai attacks. He ordered his men to dig in, create interlocking tunnels, and wait. The result was a nightmare. Over 11 miles of tunnel ran beneath the island, connecting pillboxes, artillery positions, and command posts. Bunkers were buried 30 feet deep, with steel doors, hidden exits, and overlapping fields of fire. They were virtually bomb-proof. When the first waves of American Marines landed, they found themselves facing invisible enemies, voices shouting from the earth, bullets emerging from black holes in the ground. Artillery shells fell like thunder, and within minutes, the beaches were soaked with blood. By the second day, U.S. commanders realized brute force wouldn't be enough. Every time a bunker was silenced, it seemed to come alive again within hours. Marines reported the same bunker being captured, and then firing again the next morning. That's when the word began to spread among Marine units. Bring in the flamethrowers. The M2 flamethrower, a bulky steel tank carried on the back of a single man, was one of the most feared weapons in the U.S. arsenal. It could project a stream of burning fuel up to 50 yards, instantly consuming oxygen and setting everything ablaze. But in the early days of the Pacific War, the Japanese had seen American flamethrowers fail. The thick jungle often blocked their reach, and the fuel was heavy and limited. In the Philippines and Guadalcanal, Japanese officers mocked the weapon as unreliable, something more terrifying than effective. By 1945, however, the Americans had learned. They had perfected the technique of combined assault, tanks fitted with flamethrowers, working alongside infantry. The result was a rolling inferno that could wipe out a bunker in seconds. When the first M4A3, our 3-Zippo flamethrower tanks rolled onto Iwo Jima, Japanese commanders watched through their periscopes in disbelief. They had expected artillery. They had expected grenades. But they had not expected fire. Liquid fire that crawled through vents and poured down tunnel entrances like molten death. Private First Class Robert Hill of the 5th Marine Division would later describe the scene. You didn't see the enemy at first. You just saw the openings, black holes cut into the rock. We'd toss grenades, shoot rifles, nothing. Then we'd bring up the flamethrower. The guy would squeeze the trigger, and the whole world turned orange. Inside those tunnels, Japanese soldiers screamed as the air ignited. The flamethrower didn't just burn, it consumed. The oxygen vanished in an instant, suffocating everyone inside. Those who survived the initial blast stumbled out, choking and blinded, only to be met by gunfire from waiting Marines. The weapon turned the tide of the battle. On the third day, Marine units cleared more than 50 enemy positions using flamethrowers and demolition charges. The once invincible bunkers, masterpieces of Japanese engineering, were reduced to molten rubble. A captured Japanese officer later confessed in interrogation. We laughed when we saw the Americans with their fire weapons. We thought, they will burn themselves before they burn us. But when the fire came, it was like the earth itself opened. We could not fight it. Still, it was no easy victory. Each flamethrower operator was a walking target. The fuel tanks on their backs could explode if hit. Japanese snipers learned to aim for the tanks, and many brave men died in seconds, engulfed in their own flames. Sergeant Clarence McGraw of the 28th Marines recalled, "They were the bravest guys we had. We called them the Dragons. You'd see one of them step forward with that tank on his back, fire pouring out, and you'd pray he'd make it back." At Suribachi's base, the mountain that dominated the island, the fighting was fiercest. The volcanic tunnels twisted deep inside the rock. Even direct hits from naval guns couldn't penetrate them. But when flamethrowers and tanks advanced together, the result was devastating. Whole Japanese companies were wiped out without a single visible target. When the flamethrowers ran dry, Marines sealed tunnel entrances with explosives. The ground itself rumbled as the caves collapsed. One Marine later said, "It wasn't war. It was like burning the devil out of the island." As the days passed, a strange silence began to settle after each assault. Marines could feel it, the psychological toll the flamethrowers had on the Japanese. Japanese communications intercepted by the U.S. revealed growing fear among officers. One message read, "The enemy's fire weapon brings unbearable agony. Even our strongest men lose their will." For the Japanese, who were taught that death in battle was honorable, the thought of dying trapped in flame was horrifying. It stripped away the dignity of the warrior's end. No sword, no charge, no last stand. Just suffocation and fire. The psychological impact spread faster than any bullet. Some Japanese soldiers began abandoning their posts at night, attempting to sneak through U.S. lines to die in open combat rather than burn underground. But for every bunker cleared, there were 10 more ahead. The island was an endless warren of tunnels, and the Marines had to take each one, inch by inch. By the second week, Iwo Jima had become a hell of smoke and dust. Marines lived, fought, and slept in the same black grit. Flamethrower tanks roamed like mechanical beasts, belching fire into the earth. At night, the horizon glowed red. Corporal Dean Walters wrote in his diary, "At first, I hated the smell. Now, I can't sleep without it. It's the smell of victory and death." Inside the surviving tunnels, Japanese commanders struggled to maintain control. Many communication lines were cut. Some bunkers, once holding 20 men, were now sealed tombs. One surviving Japanese lieutenant, Shiro Tanaka, later described what it was like inside those bunkers. The walls were sweating heat. We heard screams from other tunnels, and then silence. We tried to fight back, but the fire found us no matter where we hid. His words would later be found in a notebook recovered by Marines, a final testament from a dying soldier. After nearly a week of brutal fighting, the Marines reached the summit of Mount Suribachi. The now iconic flag raising on February 23rd symbolized victory, but the battle was far from over. Down below, thousands of Japanese soldiers still fought from their underground labyrinths. For nearly another month, the U.S. forces continued to burn, blast, and seal each bunker. The Japanese fought to the last man. Out of 21,000 defenders, only around 200 were captured alive. The rest either died in combat, committed suicide, or were entombed in their tunnels. The flamethrowers, once mocked, once laughed at, had proven their worth beyond question. They had turned an impregnable fortress into a graveyard. When the battle finally ended on March 26, 1945, Iwo Jima was nothing but smoke and silence. The landscape was scorched, cratered, and lifeless. Over 6,800 Americans were dead. Nearly 19,000 were wounded. Yet for those who survived, one image would never fade: the sight of flame licking across the black volcanic sand, devouring bunkers that had once defied artillery and bombs. In the words of Colonel Wendell Woody Smith, a battalion commander on the island, the flamethrower changed everything. It wasn't just a weapon. It was the only thing that could fight the earth itself. In the aftermath, U.S. military strategists took note. The lessons of Iwo Jima would shape future assaults on Okinawa and beyond. Every flamethrower operator, every tank-mounted inferno, became a symbol of the raw, brutal efficiency needed to end a war like no other. But among the surviving Japanese, the memories of those nights never left. Decades later, veterans would still speak of the fire that came from the ground. Years after the war, an American historian visited Iwo Jima with a team of researchers. Deep inside one of the remaining tunnels, they found melted helmets fused into the stone, silent reminders of the battle's intensity. When the historian asked a local guide what had happened there, the man said quietly, "This is where the fire entered." The phrase stayed with him. Where the fire entered. It was no longer about weapons or victory. It was about the human cost of war, the unimaginable suffering on both sides. For the Marines, the flamethrower was a means to survive. For the Japanese, it was the end of everything they believed invincible. The laughter that once echoed in those bunkers had long since burned away. In the end, Iwo Jima became a grave for both pride and prejudice. The Japanese commanders who had once scoffed at American flamethrowers never lived to see how wrong they were. Their underground empire, the pinnacle of defensive warfare, was undone not by bombs or artillery, but by the relentless march of men carrying tanks of fire. The Marines left behind ashes, memories, and a lesson carved into the rock itself. Even the deepest bunker cannot withstand the fury of invention, the desperation of men who refuse to lose, and the fire that consumes both enemy and earth. March 1945 faded into history, but the scars of Iwo Jima never did. The laughter that once filled those tunnels was replaced by silence, the kind of silence that only comes after the fire has gone out.